Now, the top focus of the hour and the day, the Supreme Court will deliver its judgment today on petitions challenging the Karnataka High Court order refusing to overturn the hijab ban in educational institutions in the state. After a 10-day marathon hearing, a bench of justices reserved its judgment on the pleas on September 22nd after hearing arguments from all parties. Remember, the students had filed an appeal against a Karnataka High Court decision that held that the prohibition on hijab in classrooms was a reasonable restriction and that the hijab was not an essential religious practice in Islam. Going across to my colleague Ritu, who joins us from Karnataka, where this entire controversy unfolded. Ritu, there was also an observation that was made by the court that protests around the hijab seem to be by some motivated groups and not only by individuals. This was also an observation that was made by the court, and we will come back to that while we try to reconnect with my colleague Ritu, who will be joining us from Karnataka. Remember, today will be the final verdict on the hijab, and all eyes and ears peeled for that verdict. The Justice Hemant Gupta, who is part of the bench, is all set to retire on Friday, which is why the verdict is expected today. Bench of Justices Hemant Gupta and Sudhanshu Dhulia were hearing the matter, and they will deliver the judgment in the matter today. They had received the verdict on the pleas on September 22nd after hearing arguments in the matter for 10 days at a stretch. And to recap the incident, on March 15th, the Karnataka High Court had dismissed the petitions filed by a section of Muslim students of the government pre-university girls college in Karnataka's Udupi, seeking permission to wear the hijab inside classrooms, ruling that it is not a part of the essential religious practice in Islamic faith. I believe we've re-established that connection with my colleague Ritu, who joins us live from Karnataka. Ritu, what is the kind of security arrangements that have been done? Reports coming in that it has been bolstered in UP. Are any protests expected in the wake of the verdict?
Well, exactly. You see, as in when it was been put out that there will be a verdict expected today, the police here in the Karnataka, across Karnataka, in fact, has been on a toes. Yesterday, there was also a meeting that was been called out from the Bangalore Commissioner, where he's also intimated the DCPs from all the zones in the city that all the police personnel will have to be alert and must be deployed in the areas where these kind of protests might be expected post the verdict, if it comes in favor of the state government or in favor of the Muslim community. In fact, so the police deployment has been done across the Karnataka. In fact, in districts like Mangalore, Udupi as well, which happens to be considered as in the communally sensitive districts, therein as well there is a police deployment in a huge number that has been made. Many barricades are also are in place right now in these districts that we're talking about. But yes, in the Bengaluru as well, you see there's a police deployment in the areas like Shivaji Nagar and the other main areas, Tilak Nagar and such areas, so to ensure that the law and order is being maintained on the ground. So that's the situation right now in the Bangalore city as well as across the Karnataka. So there's a tight security that has been done, we can say.
Thank you, Ritu. Stay with us. We're also joined by my colleague Anusha Soni. Anusha, along with being an anchor, is also a qualified lawyer. Very good morning to you, Anusha. If you could take us through the arguments that have been made in the case before the Supreme Court so far.
And to take our viewers through what has transpired in the Supreme Court so far. To understand today's verdict, one has to understand two very important points. One, whether hijab is protected as an essential religious practice. Now, that term is very often used, but what is the meaning of an essential religious practice? The meaning of an essential religious practice is that if I do something which is so intrinsic and core to my religion, that if I'm not allowed to perform that task, I will not be a Hindu or a Muslim or coming from some community. That is the test that the Supreme Court has put as far as essential religious practice is concerned. So when the Supreme Court really tests that whether hijab is essential religious practice or not, Quranic texts, theological arguments, different kind of religious material is going to be cited. The second limb of the argument is the institutional autonomy, which means that if I'm going to a government institution, if I'm going to a school or a college which is a government run school or a college, what takes precedence? Whether it's it's my individual faith or belief that takes the precedence, or it's the norms and the rules which have been specified by the school authorities. The Karnataka High Court had held that neither hijab is an essential religious practice and nor it can actually encroach upon the domain of the institutional autonomy of the state-run institutions. On these 2 points, we are expecting a judgment to come from the 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India. Shilpa.
Anusha, the counter argument was that a ban on the hijab would adversely affect the education of the girls as well. So if you could take us through the counter arguments as well that were posed by the council.
One of the key arguments, as you rightly said, is that if hijab is not allowed in school, there are many parents who might be very wary of sending their daughters to school. Now, if you ask me legally if that's a tenable argument, I'm afraid it's not. Because if a certain practice exists in a certain community, merely because a certain section believes it must be done, that cannot be a legally tenable argument, at least in a court of law. But yes, it's an apprehension that was put before the court as well. The second argument that was raised is that hijab is not something that they are doing against the dress code. They're wearing a complete dress. All they want to do is wear a scarf on their head, and it has been allowed for so many years. Why suddenly come up with a restriction of this nature? And the third limb of the argument is the overall secular nature of the Indian Constitution and also the freedom of consciousness in this country protected under 14, 19 and 21 of Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. So largely the argument is that I have an autonomy as an individual. I can decide what I want to wear under the Puttaswamy, under the privacy judgment, and more importantly, this is about the secular fabric of the country, and the restrictions are not really reasonable which are put by the state institutions. Those are largely the arguments. But earlier, as you were talking, Shilpa, the most important point is going to be whether it's an essential religious practice. If it is, then the institutional autonomy cannot take over. If it is not, then the institutional autonomy will take precedence in a scenario like this.
Thank you very much for summing that up for us, Anusha. Stay with us. I also want to go across to Ritu. Ritu, the court had also observed that the protests that took place in the wake of the hijab verdict in Karnataka were not only by individuals but were also by organizations with vested interests. So, can you take us through the kind of protests that Karnataka has seen in the wake of that High Court verdict?
Well, you see, when this whole issue came up in the month of December last year, just in couple of weeks, we saw how the protest has in fact spread across different districts and also intensified as well. First, it started in the Udupi, in the government PU university, wherein the 6 girls in fact came forward saying that while the headscarf was being allowed on the premises, why is there suddenly that the university is saying that they won't be henceforth allowed with the hijab to attend the classes? So therein they did boycott their classes and they started the protest, and later point we also saw how the other organization had vested their interest in it, and then the protest went on for a very long time. We had seen till last, in fact, if I'm not wrong, till May, in fact, till the time that the Mangalore University had seen a protest as well therein when the university was going through a PU board examination. So till that whole 1 year that we're talking about, the timeline, there has been a constant protest. We had seen starting from Udupi, then it is spreading, that it spread to a Mandya as well, where we saw how a girl in fact had raised a slogan as well, Allahu Akbar, therein when she was being heckled by the boys with the saffron scarf in their hands. So after that we also saw the protest taking place in the districts like Chikmagaluru and in the Mangalore as well. It also spread to a different states like Kerala too, in fact. So that was the impact that we had seen about this hijab prohibition in the state as well, in the different in the state and also in the different states as well. But